Welcome back to Blueprint to Heal. Today I have Dr. Dawn Michael on today, and we've got a lot of interesting topics to talk about. But I want to start out with discussing your experience with Remdesivir. I know it was a really tragic situation, but I think it's important for people to be informed. Anyway, thank you for being here and thank you for being willing to open up and share your story.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for having me on. I guess let me just start with what remdesivir is, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in your audience that don't even know what that drug is by Gilead and why it's so important that people do not take it. It is a failed Ebola drug that Fauci introduced when they had the Ebola epidemic. And they found that it was shutting down the kidneys and other organs in the body, and it wasn't really working. And I think it was 40 to 50% of the patients. At the same time, they were giving these patients monoclonal antibodies, and that was working. So you have one drug that was not only not working, but killing people, harming people. So if it didn't kill them, it actually harmed them internally. And you had another drug or way to heal that was working. Fast forward to the pandemic, to the COVID outbreak. They they decided that they were going to not allow people to take ivermectin or HCQ. They were going to demonize those two medications, which they did because they wanted to get the vaccine on the market. And at the same time, they had this hospital protocol that Fauci put into all of our hospitals in the United States. And that protocol included remdesivir.
But before you go on, I just want to point out for people that are not familiar with this, is if you have a drug that works, you can't push a vaccine for emergency use authorization. So I really just want to clarify that point because I think it's critical people understand that you can't have this vaccine come in if you have a protocol that's effective and working.
Correct. And that's why they made sure to demonize both ivermectin and HCQ. And if you think about it, they could have been using the ivermectin in the hospital instead of remdesivir. Ivermectin was proven to cure COVID. If you added it with an antibiotic, if you put vitamin C, vitamin D, if you did a steroid. The reason that I know this is I was married to a family practice doctor, Dr. Belio Ramos, and he had a very well-known practice in California, Thousand Oaks. He was also the medical director at Cal Lutheran University. And I would say he was one of the frontline doctors, although he didn't present himself at that because he he thought, wow, this vaccine, why are they introducing this? Why are people taking it? It never had the honeymoon period. So he was already a little curious as to why this was happening. And then he started doing his own research and he found that ivermectin, along with his own protocol, was curing these people. And when he went, I remember I was with him, we were away and one of his patients was very sick. He called the ivermectin into CVS and they told him, no, we will not fill this. He was irate. He said never in his life, his 35 years as a practicing doctor, did a pharmacist tell him that he couldn't give a medication to a patient. By the way, that medication has been FDA approved and around for so many years and has very few side effects. So this blew his mind. He thought there is something very wrong going on. This is totally unheard of. Why can't I try this? They said it was off label. Off label doesn't mean anything. Off label means they just haven't decided that that drug is for that particular virus or disease. But that doesn't mean that doctors shouldn't be thinking out of the box and trying anything they could to cure someone. So he found a compound pharmacy in the local area, and they were able to compound the ivermectin for him. And what he saw in his patients was unbelievable. When they came in, right off the bat, he would give them the cocktail of the ivermectin, the antibiotic and the steroid, and it knocked it out. Almost all of his patients were cured. Almost none of them went to the hospital. Only
Hey,
9 ended up in the hospital.
yeah, can I
Mhm.
interrupt you for a second? So, when you say that it knocked it out of them, we both know that 95% of COVID deaths occurred in people with, averaging 4 comorbidities. So, can you state whether the people that responded positively had comorbidities, or were they people that were just healthy? I realize that they weren't your patients, and maybe you don't have the answer to that, but I just thought I would throw that out there.
Oh, I do. I really think that the comorbidities did not play so much into this unless they didn't take the remdesivir and they ended up in the hospital.
Okay.
See, if they were given the remdesivir and this whole protocol, for the most part, almost everyone was cured with it, even people that were not well. And he did have an aging clientele. He had them, he had, people in their 40s and 50s, and he had the children of the aging. So he had
Yeah.
all the groups.
I think you meant to
Um,
say the ivermectin protocol, not remdesivir.
no, in the hospital, if they
Oh,
were,
okay. So
yeah.
if they were in the hospital, they got remdesivir and these other protocols, they did okay.
No, no, if they got the ivermectin in the hospital. Did
Okay.
I?
Yeah, you said
So I'm sorry. So they should have had the ivermectin in the hospital instead of the remdesivir.
correct.
So if they had had that, the patients that went to the hospital, they would have survived.
Okay.
So, but what was happening in the hospitals at the time is if someone was sick and they were coming in, they were sending them home. They weren't giving them the ivermectin. They weren't giving them HCQ. I don't even know if they were giving them monoclonal antibodies. They were just sending them home.
Right.
So what happens then is ivermectin really only works if you get it in the beginning. That's where the problem is. If you try to give a patient the ivermectin when they're already 9 days into it, 7 days into it, then it's already taken hold of the body. And especially in the Delta variant, which both my husband and I had, it attacks the lower lungs. And you really, at that point, you need to be on medical grade oxygen. So that's what was happening at the time, is that they were sending the people home.
Right.
So fast forward now to my situation and my late husband's situation. Is it was at the end of 2021 where he and I had already been doing a lot of research. I had been sending him some videos from Dr. Peter McCullough on the dangers of remdesivir. I've been sending him some information on the vaccine because he still thought at one time, okay, maybe you could give it to older people. And I'm like, no, you can't. Like, it's not good for anybody. And he realized that that was true at one point. He never recommended the vaccine to anyone, by the way. He would just give them counter videos of like Dr. Peter McCullough and some of the frontline doctors to say, hey, before you decide to take it, why don't you do your own research? And the other thing that he was doing, which I thought was amazing, is he was giving college students exemptions.
Mm.
And very few doctors knew how to do that. But he found that in the vaccine, tried to look up the ingredients or what he could. He found this particular ingredient that is in many other vaccines where a person can have an allergic reaction to. And so he would put that on the medical exemption and they would not have to take the COVID vaccine. So he saved many college age students from getting the vaccine. So in my eyes, he was a hero.
Well,
So
the
what
fact
happened
that
with
he
us?
was, prescribing ivermectin before other people were doing that, and my guess is that he was probably getting some backlash, I mean, was he getting any backlash from other medical doctors?
The thing with him is he owned his own practice. So he didn't have to tell other medical doctors what was happening. And you're bringing up a point that I want to remember that is very, very important. When Obama was president, he made doctors put all of their medical records on the internet. Do you remember that? I don't know if you
Yes, I
remember
do.
that.
Yep.
Okay. So, what happened with that, in my belief, is it's a violation of the Privacy Act because now somebody in the government, which we know the government is corrupt, can look at your medical records. They can spy on you. And what happened is my husband decided he wasn't going to do it. He's like, I'm not putting all these medical records on. Just forget it. It's just, it would take me forever. I'm not doing it. So he didn't. So what happened with him is he became a ghost in the system. Nobody knew he was giving his patients ivermectin because he wasn't putting it in his files, which weren't seen by the government. We didn't have anyone come in our office and say, hey, you have to do PPE, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to wear a mask, blah, 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 blah. He had no one coming in. They didn't even know he existed. He just wasn't in the system. So that's how I'm answering that question is no, other doctors didn't really know. And his patients were thrilled. So they would tell their friends, if you get, go to Dr. Ramos, he's going to give you ivermectin. You're not going to end up in the hospital and so on and so forth. And once again, he didn't have the vaccine in his office. He wasn't giving it to patients. So he and I believe we had COVID. I don't know if you know, but we were in California right before they announced that COVID had broken out. Many people in Southern California got a really weird flu, which I believe was COVID. They just didn't say that we had it.
Yeah.
So by all the symptoms and everything that we had, I believe we both had it, and we thought we both had COVID. So now fast forward 2 years later, he's treating many patients that come in with COVID. Neither one of us have gotten sick. My office is in his office. I see some of his patients because I'm a therapist. And so we go back and forth. We had business together. Neither one of us got sick for 2 years. Then I guess one patient came in with the Delta variant, quote unquote. I think he and I were targeted. That's just me. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I believe he and I were targeted because nobody else in the office, none of his workers, nobody else got sick. Just him and I. And we didn't think that we had COVID because we thought we already had it, that we were immune to it. And I had spoken to Dr. Peter McCullough or heard his stuff. I hadn't spoken to him yet, but I'd heard his stuff that said you can't get it twice. So we thought, you can't get it twice. And I do not believe that the Delta variant was COVID. I'm still thinking it was something else because the way it attacked my body, I'd never felt anything like it in my life. It was definitely a bioweapon. It was sophisticated. It came in different stages and it kept you guessing as to what it was. So we thought we both had the flu. He thought he had the flu, a very high fever for 3 or 4 days. And then it went away, but it didn't go away.
Yeah.
It started to go into the lungs.
Yeah, I just want to interrupt you for a second. So January 2020, we all came down with, whatever. I'm pretty
Right.
sure it was COVID because, when all this stuff came out about COVID, I still continue to see people in my practice. I had to move out of my office. I moved it to my house because a lot of people were scared and weren't coming in or going out at all. So I was outside Philadelphia at the time. But I continue to see people with active COVID infections
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to get chiropractic care. So they came in. I never wore a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the exception of one time, I had one woman who was fearful that her mother, who was living with them, would get it. So I, did wear it one time in the whole time, that I was seeing patients. And at one point, I went to see if I had the antibodies, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how that kind of confirmed in me that we had had it in January 2020. And we never got sick again with it. That was it. It
Mm-hmm.
was the one
Right.
shot, one time. We had
Yep.
immunity. And I had some really sick people coming in to
Yep.
see me. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
I'm right on board with you on that. I believe that we had COVID. I believe we were targeted with something else because even my symptoms and everything were different than from what I remember the COVID.
Right.
And I didn't wear a mask. In fact, I never wore a mask. I tried. There's so many stories with me where they tried to arrest me, different places, so on and so forth. I just would refuse to put a mask on, even with my clients. They all knew. But so anyway, we did not take the protocol, and this is the problem. My
Right.
husband didn't take it. So I would say 8, 9 days into him being sick, maybe it was less than that. We never took a COVID test either because I didn't believe them. I thought they're a joke from what I had read, which it turns out they are, obviously. Um, I said, just treat it as if you have COVID. let's do the ivermectin, let's do the antibiotic, let's do the steroid, let's do the vitamin D, vitamin, whatever we were taking. Take it all. He did, but it was too late. It already got to his lower lung. So we had an oxygen machine in the house, but it just wasn't strong enough. And we had the thing on his finger, which was showing his oxygen levels, and they got really low. And he said to me, he goes, "I'm sorry, honey, you have to take me to the hospital." I go,
Mm.
"No, I can't take you to the hospital." I go, "You're not going to come out." He's like, "No, take me to Los Robles." By the way, worst hospital in the world. He's like, all of my, I know everyone there because he had worked at Los Robles. He assisted in surgery years ago. He knew all the doctors there. And the hospitalist that he had sent his 9 patients to that got sick, he was taking care of him. He would be on the phone with that hospitalist at night, and he would be making that hospitalist give them ivermectin, which nobody in that hospital was happy. And he was watching his patients, like he was watching over them.
Right.
So I think they all, I think they all survived. So anyway, I drove him to the hospital. They wouldn't let me in. I gave him a kiss goodbye. I was crying. I said, "Make sure that you do not take remdesivir. Make sure they do not give you remdesivir." He's like, "I'll make sure they won't, blah, 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 blah." I tell the nurses that. I call the nurse for 2 days. I'm calling. He said the waiting room was horrendous. It was a nightmare, which I later found out was because I went to the hospital as well. And 2 days into it, I finally got a hold of him, and the nurse found out they had been giving him remdesivir. And I pleaded, please don't. He's like, I don't know. They're giving it. I'm trusting them. The doctors, I'm like, how could you trust him? But he wasn't here mentally. You have to understand that the Delta virus affects the mind too. It's really a crazy bioweapon. So I then, a couple days later, got sick and I started getting the high fever. I started doing everything. I don't know why I didn't take the ivermectin. I think because he was in the hospital and I didn't know where to get it from, and I finally got him to get me ivermectin, but I didn't take it till day 3 or 4. If I would have taken it day 1, it would have been wiped out too. But I was taking that with the whole everything, and then I was taking the oxygen. It got into my lower lungs, started on the oxygen machine, but I was more nervous and anxious, and I think it was throwing off the thing that, what do you call it, an oximeter? It's
Right.
supposed to tell your oxygen levels. It wasn't reading mine correctly, so it looked like my oxygen was really low. So my son got panicky. Abilia was in the hospital, a panicky. My neighbor, who's a medic, started getting panicky, and everybody said, "You have to go to the hospital. Your levels are so low," so on and so forth. So they put me in an ambulance and drove me to the hospital. I had in my bag all of my ivermectin, my vitamins, and everything. There's no way I was not going to stop taking that. And I remember sitting in the ambulance for about 3 or 4 hours. The doctor comes up to the ambulance, and I made the mistake just at this one point. The very first thing he asked me, not how I'm doing, nothing. "Are you vaccinated?" That's the very first thing he asked me. And I just was so out of it. I said no. I wish I wouldn't have said no, because when I finally got into the waiting room in the hospital, they treated me like dog. Like I was the biggest whatever. They shoved me in a room, like a closet room with 3 other people in a wheelchair. And by the way, those other people didn't have COVID, so they could care less if someone got COVID.
Right.
They weren't in there for COVID. One was in there for restless leg syndrome, and another one had strep throat. I was more worried that I was going to get strep throat on top of it, but they were not worried. Um, I was in that wheelchair for hours and hours with just the oxygen tank. Nobody came in to see me. Nobody gave me water. I finally grabbed a doctor. I said, "Can you bring me a glass of water?" He brought me water that was brown,
Oh my
literally brown.
God.
I threw it in the trash. I kept the cup. I walked around the corner because I still was able to do that. And I filled up my thing with water. And I later learned that they try to dehydrate you and all that and make you sick and so on and so forth. Finally, I got up and down the halls and I said, "You need to get me upstairs or release me. I'm done. I'm done sitting in this wheelchair for 4 or 5 hours." I was already in the ambulance for that long. Finally, they take me. They didn't give me a COVID test, by the way. Finally, they take me and they give me a chest x-rays, put me back in the seat. Then the guy comes in, he's going to stick that thing up my nose. I go, you are not putting that thing up my nose. I never had a COVID test. I'm like, no, I refuse it. I go, here, you could put the tip right there. That's all he did. He did not put it in my nose. They never took a COVID test of me. Um, by the way, they were all just wearing masks downstairs. People were sitting on the floor. They were sitting in wheelchairs. They were sitting, I mean, it was a complete nightmare. And the doctors were wearing just their regular stuff and these little flimsy masks, okay? They did not care and they knew. And it was all theater.
Right.
Finally, I get wheeled upstairs to the third floor. It's so busy downstairs. It's a ghost town upstairs. There's one nurse up there. Patients are locked in their rooms, basically. There's like no staff. The guy who was wheeling me up, I'm like, where is everybody? He said, oh, either they were fired or what was the other one? Monochrome. I don't know. There was another variant out at the time. And they all had to stay at home for 10 days. So they were so short staffed. And when I got into the COVID ward, they were all wearing these hazmat suits. I thought I walked into some weird movie. I was like, what is this? They're wearing these things that had the tube in the back and they're on, they wouldn't touch me. But the guy wheeling me in had a mask.
Had a
It was so
regular surgical
a
mask.
regular mask.
Yeah.
I was like, this is such bullshit. But I was so tired, so exhausted. It must have been 12 o'clock at night by then. They laid me down in bed. They hooked me up with an IV. I fell asleep, woke up, and I'm like, where's the doctors? What are they putting inside of me? Where is something? I need to speak to the doctor. I want to speak to the doctor right now. Finally, the doctor comes in, Dr. Graham, who's a hospitalist, who is a colleague of my late husband for 20 years and the person that my husband sent his patients to. First thing he asked me, are you vaccinated? This time I said yes. I said, I'm vaccinated. And I had a fake vaccine card too in my wallet. They didn't ask for that, but I said, yeah, I'm vaccinated. And then I said, what are you giving me? I want to know everything you're giving me. Nobody's telling me anything. He's like, antibiotics, steroid, and remdesivir. I said, what? What? You're giving me remdesivir? How many doses of remdesivir? They gave me 2 doses, one right when I got there and one when I woke up in the morning. And I had previously been on the antibiotic, so I did not need to be on an antibiotic. And I said, you have to take me off remdesivir and you have to take me off the antibiotic. And he looked at my charts and he's like, oh, when did you get COVID? I said 5 days prior. He's like, oh, yeah, we can take you off the remdesivir. It doesn't really work after, like 5 days, right?
Right.
And I said to him, but my husband had COVID 9 days prior to coming to the hospital, and you gave him 5 rounds of it. He just looked at me, put his head down, and walked out of the room. Like he knew. He already knew. It was almost 2022 that the remdesivir is killing people. And one other thing that at that time period, which is so infuriating, is the Biden administration said, we're halting monoclonal antibodies. Right when the monochromo whatever came out and the Delta came out, they halted all monoclonal antibodies. And my husband's really good friend, who was a doctor there of infectious disease, asked the administration to please get him monoclonal antibodies before they started him on the remdesivir. They said, no, the Biden administration, we can't get it. So they purposely did that.
It's incredible to me how,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I mean, I'm like an optimistic kind of person. It doesn't mean I'm not skeptical, but I guess for me, when I saw all this happening, I immediately, I knew it was all about the vaccine, but I couldn't grasp the lengths they would go to push this vaccine through. I just couldn't grasp it because to me it was just so sinister and evil that, you know, there's always been this thing called informed consent, right? You go to the
Mm-hmm.
hospital,
Mm-hmm.
they want to do surgery, and you have to say okay, or you have to have someone who's got the power of attorney say okay before they do anything, surgery. So for you to be able to go in and say, I do not want remdesivir, and your husband said that, and they still do it,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that it's not working because they knew it wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had the bodies, the death toll
Yes.
to prove it. And like, what kind of person? I know this gets away from, your stream of consciousness right now, but it just sickens me. I find it so disturbing that the lengths they would go to push this vaccine. That, I understand, the doctors may not have realized how bad the vaccine was from the get-go, but to say, look, I don't want to get this medicine, that they should have listened. That's it. I mean, they should have listened to your husband and you and everybody else.
But but this is what people don't understand what the government did. How hideous this is they were paying the hospitals, the government was paying the hospitals for them to give patients remdesivir.
Right.
And then they would pay them more to vent them, and then they would pay them more to write that they had a COVID fatality. So they were basically incentive to kill is really what it was. And it
Right.
is.
And it wasn't just if the person died, quote, of COVID. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I remember whoever was in charge of the CDC at the time, maybe it was Walensky, who she came on the TV and said, if you die with COVID, it's going to be counted as a COVID death. I mean,
Yes.
it was very clear. And there was a lot of information out there about the incentives that the hospitals were getting, as you
Mm-hmm.
said, to do the vent, and they were just looking to drive up the COVID deaths so
Mm-hmm.
that they can, have fear in people. They could push this vaccine through. I still like, I knew when Biden was running, it was very clear to me he was going to try to mandate it.
Yep.
And I had been a lifelong registered Democrat, and I did not vote for Biden. I did not vote for Hillary because I felt that she was also, a pharma shill.
Mm-hmm.
I voted independent in those two elections because I just, as a lifelong Democrat, it was very hard for me to just go, okay, I'm going to vote Republican now. Like I had been so into that identity of being a
Mm-hmm.
Democrat. But I knew that he was going to do that. And just like even the whole theatrics when, after his inauguration with him and Kamala um, at the Lincoln Memorial. Do you remember that? And it was all
Mm-hmm.
black and, and he was talking about those that have lost their lives to COVID. I just can't get past how horrible that is. And you're a real person who dealt with it. I didn't have anybody close to me who was in the hospital, but how do you move on from that?
I think, well, let me just finish that part of the story because it's people don't really realize what was going on in the hospitals. They did not want anybody in there witnessing what they were doing to the patients. And my husband and I were texting back and forth. We were on the same floor together, and he was telling me that people were dying of blood clots. So there was a lot of people dying from blood clots from the vaccine, and there were people dying from the remdesivir. Um, they did not want us together. They forbid it. I tried to get out of my room one time to see him, and they drugged me and put me back in my room. And as it turned out, I did not see him till after he passed away.
Mm.
And the hard part for me is these were his colleagues. They've known him forever. The hospital staff, everybody knew like he was one of their own, and they still would not allow him to be with his wife. So the cruelty that happened on the COVID floor, people don't talk about that, what they were doing. I have so many people that lost loved ones that weren't able to see them that have sent me emails because they've heard of my story. And you asked me part of what I'm doing. Part of what I'm doing is talking, and I'm speaking out because there's many people that are not speaking out, that just don't have the voice, or they don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to relive it. And so it becomes silent. We don't really know what's happening. And the fact that the drug is still in hospitals today, that they're still giving people remdesivir today, is a crime. It's an absolute crime. It's killing 30 to 40% of the people they give it to and injuring them. When I came out of the hospital, my organs were a mess. I was a mess from just 2 doses that I didn't consent to. So, this is also a warning for people. If you go into the hospital and they give you a COVID test, first of all, don't allow them to give you a COVID test because those things are rigged. But if they somehow do not allow them to give you remdesivir. It will mess you up. It mess you up mentally. It mess you up inside. Um, they gave me other things through the IV that I'm not even sure about. I know they didn't give me the vaccine because I told them I had it. But the very last thing the doctor said to me after my husband passed away, I was put in my room for 11 hours without anybody seeing me. They wouldn't let my children come in. They brought me one meal. Um, the doctor finally, when he released me, the very last thing he said to me is make sure you get your booster shot. So it's like, they're like, what was that about? Like, even if I had the Delta variant, you would say that I have the antibodies for it, right? They're
Right.
so programmed or brainwashed. Like, why would you tell somebody after they've had a virus, which you now know that they have the antibody for, to go get a booster shot? I mean, that just is malpractice saying that. So the whole thing is a nightmare, really, for me and other people who have suffered through it. But I have a faith in God, and I believe God put me there and saved me so that I could tell everything that I saw. And I have been talking about the things I've seen, and I was on social media when I was in the hospital. I think that saved my life for actually talking about what was going on. They wanted me out of there. Like if they weren't going to kill me, they wanted me out of there.
And I'm
So,
sure there's people that are watching this that won't believe it, right? I think that there are people that are saying to themselves, there's no way that this is true. There's no way, this woman is a crackpot, right? Because I think it's so hard for people to fathom, like I did, like even though like I already knew about the whole, childhood vaccine schedule and the problems with that. And even me, like I had a hard time understanding how doctors could go along with this, watching patients die. I don't care how much money that they're giving you. It's almost like I have to feel like they were holding a gun to people's head, whatever that gun was, because doctors, they become doctors because they want to help people and heal people. How does that get turned around into not, first of all, not thinking critically about what's happening to people that are taking this drug? How do they watch these people die? How do they not live up to their oath to, informed consent? How do they go so far away from the reason why they became doctors?
I think part of it is when you place a person in a situation where there's parameters. They're being told by the administrator, they're being told by the government. There's these parameters that are telling them how to act in a certain situation that's an emergency. And so they're following that. So, of course, in the beginning, nobody knew what was going on. They're following these parameters, they're believing in them, they've been taught a certain way. I would say medical doctors are some of the most, I don't want to say brainwashed, but they've just been taught to think a certain way, to trust this, trust the evidence, trust this, trust that. They're not thinking outside the box a lot. Um, and the materials that they're giving are all skewed a certain way nowadays. So you have to, I understood that, yes, they started this way, okay? But what happens when you're in it and you're in it and you're in it, and maybe you see people dying, you start justifying it. Well, the government says it's okay. Well, this is what my colleagues are doing. Everyone else is doing it.
Right.
So, and then the few people, and then there are some people and nurses who I've spoken to who said they couldn't do it anymore. Like their conscience got to them. And some doctors too, but it was mostly nurses. And I've spoken to many of them about the remdesivir issue and the way they were treating patients during COVID, just the awful treatment. And they said, I can't do it anymore. I'm quitting. I'm out of there. So who do you have left? Do you have left these people who have decided to just put on their blinders and just that's where they're at?
Just this whole story of them handing you a cup of water after you've asked for it, like that whole standard of care. Like you
Yep.
want to hydrate people, and then them giving you a water that's brown.
Dirty. Yeah.
Eh, You know,
It was disgusting.
it's like so incredible to me, like just something
And
so
Nancy,
basic.
if I couldn't get up to get water, which I could still at that point, what am I going to do? Drink
You
the
would have
dirty water?
you would have died. I mean,
I would have, yeah,
you
it's totally
can't,
dehydrated.
yeah, you can't live when you're dehydrated. We need water.
And you're sick. And I had a high fever, an oxygen tank. I mean, I was really sick. So, yeah,
So have you been able to tell your story and have people that were like very entrenched in the medical world come around and say, yeah, I've seen that. And you know what I'm saying? Like, have you seen that kind of reversal in their thought
yeah,
patterns?
more and more people. More and more people are because there's more and more evidence coming out. You can't contain all of this, especially when you have X. They took over Twitter. Everything is on there. I mean, it's open. That is really a free speech platform, and so is Rumble, and so is True Social. The evidence is coming out, and people are talking. Real people are talking, even on TikTok. They're coming out too. I still think Facebook's very censored.
Yeah.
Um, I was banned from Twitter for 8 months for talking about remdesivir and the vaccine. They just kicked me off. I'm just talking about my story and what happened to me. A YouTube video that I did was kicked off too. So, but
I've
Nancy, I do see people coming around. I
Yeah,
do.
I've already been thinking about how I definitely can't post this on my YouTube channel. I've had so many videos taken down with,
Yep.
with
Isn't that
reference
sad?
material, like people that are citing their sources
Yeah.
and they're good
And this is my
sources.
story.
And this is your
And this
story. So
personal story.
yeah, so I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm like, oh, no way can I post this on YouTube. Can I post it on Facebook? And yeah, I had actually a permanent ban on Twitter also back
Mm-hmm.
in, I want to say January 2020. I was already speaking out
Yeah.
about what was going. It was probably later in the year, but I'd been speaking out about vaccines for years. So I was already, on their watch list. And then with COVID, I kept staying over and over again, 95% of deaths occur in, people that are, averaging four comorbidities, 80% over 80 years old, because I knew they were going to push this vaccine. So I was just trying to prepare people, don't take the bait, you know?
Right.
And, I was sharing my story about how I had COVID. And then one day, boom, I was gone. And I had a Facebook page with about 27,000 people. It
Mm-hmm.
was, it went down. And that's another thing that I just have such a hard time with is knowing what's going on behind the scenes so that the general public doesn't get this information.
Yeah.
And it's so
Well,
hard to fathom that they actually want people to die. That is so like I see it and I understand it, but for me to feel that inside my soul that this
but
is what people want.
if you have an agenda where you want to push something and you do have people that follow blindly, I know it's hard for people to think that there's this kind of evil in the world. I think that's the hardest thing is for people to realize that there is evil. But you have to think about what happened in Nazi Germany,
Right.
that what's happening all over the world. I mean, there's been so many horrible holocausts. I equate this to a holocaust. I
Yeah,
mean, it
I do
really
too.
is. It's Nuremberg. I mean, it's this is a Holocaust that continues and it's continuing today because we're still giving people remdesivir. People are still getting the COVID vaccine. They're now giving it to babies 6 months and older.
I,
I mean, what's going to
Crying.
happen to these kids?
Yeah, I
It
mean,
has to stop. It
yeah.
has to stop.
Well, and as you probably know, the vaccine schedule was already a, terrible thing,
Oh,
never
yes.
scientifically proven for safety.
Yeah.
the, individual vaccines have never been properly tested for safety.
Hmm.
Giving multiples in one visit have never been tested for safety. The only reason why they wanted it on the schedule was so that the manufacturers of this vaccine and all the vaccines to be free from liability. That's the reason why they wanted it on the schedule. But to give it again to 6 months, children are not are have
I know.
never been, been a problem as far as getting COVID. Most of the time, they
No.
didn't even know they had it. It was a little cold. The parents just said, go out and play. And there is absolutely no justification for this to be given. Just like there's no justification to give a 1-day-old baby the hepatitis B shot. There's
Right.
zero justification.
Exactly.
So,
I feel the same way as you. So, you know, and by the way, I will put this on my X account so that it
okay.
gets out there too, to populate it on there because I
Yeah,
have a decent following on there.
you do. You do. I
Yeah,
I have been working, X, and man, I'll tell you, it's tough. I believe they have an algorithm against me
they do.
because
They,
had the same thing with Facebook. So I had a page called Healthy Alternatives to Vaccinations. I had a podcast by the same name. I started it when SB 277 was happening in California, which was, I think, around 2015. And it was growing steadily. And all of a sudden, it started growing, big time. I was getting 100, 200, 300 new followers a week. It went from 5,000 to like 27,000 over a few months. So I had this huge following, and all of a sudden, and I never had a drop in my numbers, it only increased. And all of a sudden, I noticed that for every 100 new people, there'd be 100 unfollowers.
mm-hmm.
And I never broke 27,000, 6 or 8 months. It should have been, 35, 40,000. And then one day it was gone. And
I do believe that people who were banned, because for me, coming back on, trying to get my followers back, it's been years now and it's taken me, I came back at 130. I'm almost at 160. It's taken me that long. And my account should be huge because I was retweeted by President Trump 11 times. My account should be huge from that.
it
And
should
it
be.
was growing. It was growing, growing, growing. And they shut me down. And all the other people that were being retweeted are have a million followers above. So yeah,
Well, and it's funny you say that because so my account, so I did this big post about, and I was about 5,000 followers, and I did this post about how I was disenchanted with the Democratic Party and I was going to vote for Trump. Like this was like a huge deal for me. And
mm-hmm,
I noticed that when I first started telling people I was going to vote for Kennedy, I never got a backlash from the right. I've always had friends on both sides of the aisle, try to have, civil conversations to be,
mm-hmm,
I want to learn, like, why are you so pro-Trump, right? So I'd have these conversations. And when I talked about Kennedy, the backlash was vile from the left. And the
mm-hmm.
right was like, oh, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it.
Yep.
So that's why I decided to actually, finally vote for a Republican. And that post
Who
went
was a
viral.
Democrat? Who was a Democrat?
Oh, you mean Harris?
No, Trump.
Oh, right. Who was it? Okay. Yes, he had been a Democrat. So what was
Yeah.
interesting, so this post went viral. It had like 60 million views.
Wow.
Yeah, so all the big, conservative guys, retweeted it, the Hodge twins and Bill Ackman. I got responses from Tulsi Gabbard and Elon Musk. I'm not sure if he commented or retweeted it, but it just exploded, the post. So all of a sudden I went from like 5,000 to 25,000 and I was able to grow it a little exponentially.
That's
And
great.
but then all of a sudden I was actually close to 30 and I'm posting the same information and my
Yeah.
numbers start dropping. So
Mm-hmm.
now I'm just trying to hold on to the 27,000. So if you're if you're listening and you're on X, please follow me and help me get information information out
I
there
know it's hard.
because I'm really trying to educate people about
Hmm.
a variety of topics to help people get healthier. I was Maha before there was even that phrase Maha. I've been doing this for a long
Right.
time. So, oh boy. Well,
But I've been doing a live on Thursdays. I'd love to have you on. I do it with a friend of mine, Coach Ellie, and she's into nutrition, and we have some great topics that we go over. And yeah, I would love to have you come on,
I
maybe
would
the
love
next
it.
one or the one after.
I would
And
love
that'll
it.
help you also get viewers and followers. And I think that's the way to kind of build a community and to get on the live as well.
Yeah, I do too. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story. I'm sure it's got to be difficult to relive it over and over, but you're on a mission, and when you're on a mission, you put your own feelings aside because you, like me, you want to educate people. You don't want
Hmm.
people to be exposed to this drug. And I also want to mention in the very near future, we're also going to talk about cancer. So that will be
Yeah.
our next topic for our next podcast. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's been great to meet you.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on and follow me on, you said mission, which is funny, at Dawn's Mission is my ex. Or you
Yeah,
can look up Dr. Dawn Michael. And then I'll be
awesome.
posting this video on there too.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Nancy. All right. You have a great day.
You too.